Welcome back to the Flex the Diet podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike T. Nelson. On this podcast, we talk about all things to increase muscle, improve performance, improve body composition, do all of it without destroying your health. And today we've got a super cool topic that's more related to enhancing performance. This is on the topic of microdosing, certain types of psychedelics. And we've got on the program today Dr. James Fadiman and Jordan Gruber. Super stoked to talk to these guys. They have a new book out. It's entitled Microdosing for Health, Healing, and Enhanced Performance by Dr. James Fadiman, Jordan Gruber. It's really good. I actually picked it up myself and really been enjoying it. Was super stoked to have them on the podcast. You may recognize Dr. James Fadiman was one of the first people I ever saw talk about the concept of microdosing. And in the podcast today, we talk about a wide range of things, of how microdosing became a thing, what are the differences between a macro, a very large dose of these compounds, and a small microdose. Hint, it is radically different in terms of the just effects that you will feel, which I think overall is a good thing. I think this allows the use of microdosing to be much more common. We talk about the research, our experiences with it, and how this may enhance your performance. And also, how did they get into this? I was reading Dr. James Fadiman's research, many years ago. Side note, this is for entertainment purpose only. None of this is medical advice in any way, shape, or form. As of this recording in the US, many of the compounds we talk about are Schedule 1 federally illegal substances. Hopefully that may change, but as of this recording, they are currently illegal. So there are legal ramifications that possibly can come with this. Some states have opted to decriminalize them in different areas. Obviously, if you are living outside the US, legislation and laws are quite different in different countries. So, really enjoyed this conversation. Big thanks to them for coming on the podcast. And as I've talked about in the past, I have done higher doses of primarily ayahuasca. This was down in Costa Rica. I'll link to the podcast. I've talked about that. And if you have any questions or any thoughts on this, I would really love to hear from you. And another good part is that they are doing their best to collect as much data as they can on what are the experiences people have had with microdosing. So we give all the links to that. So I would encourage people, if they have had experiences, to please submit them there. They are collecting this data. They are going through all of it. What's great about that is it gives us an idea of, one, what are people experiencing? What are they using it for? And this can then also be used to inform more formal research. So there is a ton more research now going on in the use of psychedelics, both on a macro and a microdosing schedule, which is really great to see. So enjoy this podcast with Dr. James Fadiman and Jordan Gruber. Thank you guys both for being here on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Our pleasure. We're glad to be here.
Yes, thank you. And I have your new book here, Microdosing for Health and Healing and Enhanced Performance, which is great. And I guess the first question for you, Dr. Fadiman, is for people, hopefully most people listening to this podcast have heard of you, but you've been looking at, we'll start with the macro doses of psychedelics for quite some time, measured in decades. How did you first end up being interested in that? Because I always feel like there's usually a fascinating story.
For high-dose psychedelics, I was a year out of college. I was living in Paris, and my favorite professor, Richard Alpert, who became Ramdas, was passing through and said he wanted to hang out with me, and I was honored. He said, "Greatest thing in the world has happened to me." And I was waiting for a great story. And instead, he reaches in his pocket and comes out with a little bottle and puts a pill on the table. And I am so straight in those days, I don't drink coffee. And I look at the pill and I look at him, and he's feeling and seeming to be healthier and better than I've ever seen him. So I took the pill. And
Aha.
my life unfolded in different ways after that. It was what would we now call a moderate dose of psilocybin, and it shifted my capacity to have unusual thoughts. And some weeks later, I was a graduate student at Stanford and worked with another group outside of Stanford and took a very high dose of psychedelics, which totally rearranged my beliefs in things like birth, death, time, space, and a few other variables. Flash forward 40, 50 years, and I get interested in microdosing. How's that?
Yeah. No, that's great. And any experiences you wanted to share, Jordan, or how did you become interested in this field?
Oh, it started back in college. I had an interest in human potential, and I've been through everything from the neo-pagan movement to men's movement to New Age seminars to the occult. And psychedelics was always part of the way. And I met a fellow in Pennsylvania who was not a guru, but a very advanced user. And it's just been part of my life ever since. And then I met Jim in 1990 at a conference, and we became friends. And that's how we get to be here today.
Awesome. And how did you guys get interested in microdosing? The first time I ever heard of this was, I think, it was probably an ebook, or maybe it was even published originally as a pamphlet that Dr. Fadiman had put out years ago. And that was before I had any even a macrodose experience. And I was kind of like, I don't know. It just seems like another interesting way to do psychedelics. I didn't really understand it. And then I talked about this in the podcast, having done a high dose of ayahuasca. I then looked back at the microdosing stuff and I was like, oh, maybe there's some benefits here without having to go through the whole macrodose experience, which I think can be useful for people. But again, it comes with a lot of cautions of set and setting. And like you said, having a lot of your whole belief systems like put in one of those little the snow globes and shaken up for a
Yes.
while.
Oh, I was not interested in microdosing at all. I was only interested in very high doses. But I had a lunch with a friend in Santa Cruz, and he talked about Albert Hoffman, who created LSD. And in his 90s, he was taking very low doses. And he said they were very good for walking in the woods and thinking. And my friend was very excited by that. And I thought, I couldn't care less. That's nothing about transcendence, the magic of God speaking to you directly. But I got a little curious because I am, and I asked some friends in Santa Cruz if they would try this little super low dose. And they came back and said, yeah, I feel really nice. And I thought, that's nice. And then they came back the second day and said, I feel just as nice. That was the first
Hmm.
time that something went off in my mind because normally we talk about a substance that's in your body, it has a lot of effects, it leaves your body and it doesn't have any more effects. And here was this super little nothing that seemed to have a 2-day positive beneficial effect. And I started exploring from there. And as you pointed out, microdosing has none, you can define it really as saying everything you know about high doses, it's not that. It doesn't distort your visuals, it doesn't open your head to magical thinking, you don't find yourself on another planet in another earlier life. All of the adventures and wonderful things that high doses have done. And what we're now seeing, and I'm thinking of Connor Murray, UCLA, who said it very nicely, it looks like that the correct dose for psychedelic substances is the microdose because it has beneficial effects and remarkably few other effects. And that the higher doses, which need setting, situation, care, and also make sure you don't do anything else for the day, those are what we might call overdoses. And if you think that way, a lot of things come into play, it makes sense, including a lot of the indigenous work. So we're rediscovering the ordinary. It's the same reason that you have 1 cup of coffee. Nobody says, I wonder what it's like if you have 15 cups of coffee. Someone would say, that's too much. That's an overdose. That's a different realm. But what if we only knew 15 cups of coffee and there are these people walking around having 1 cup and having better days? So that's the model that we're seeing. And we're seeing it in so many places by so many people.
Yeah, a nice one-word phrase to sum it up is less is enough. We are pretty well hooked into the idea that you have to have more, and we're finding less is enough.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. And I'm also just thinking, mechanistically, you mentioned that they felt better after day 2
Yeah.
when there isn't really anything left of the substance in their body, which is fascinating.
What it says is the body is making use of what it has just taken in. It's not a symptom that's being suppressed. Most medications, let's face it, suppress a symptom, which is why as soon as it leaves the body, the symptom comes back and you need another one. Things that improve your overall health, you don't need as much because your body takes over and takes advantage of the improvement.
So, another way
Go
of
ahead.
thinking of it, Mike, is that someone gave us the analogy of imagine taking 100 micrograms of LSD once in a month or 10 micrograms 10 times. You get the same amount of new information comes into your body either way. You learn the same amount, but which way are you likely to be able to remember more? Which way are you going to be able to use more? So as microdosing gets going, and remember, it's not just a microdose, it's on a pattern or a schedule or protocol. As it gets going, we know that the neuroplasticity is real and that it begins building. We know that the anti-inflammatory effect is real and it begins building. We know that the general tendency to bring us back into a healthier state of self, to equilibrium and homeostasis, is real. And all of that keeps going, and you learn how to use it on the microdose. You have plenty of time to take it in and integrate it and make use of it without having to go through the trauma or minor trauma of a big dose, which it can always be intense by definition.
So it's much more of, this may be an oversimplification, but like thinking of it from a health perspective, like people who take fish oil or creatine for sports performance and even cognitive function now, not the standard typical pharmaceutical model, which we tend to think about because, like you said, you're not suppressing symptoms, you're actually trying to get to more of the, in little air quotes, root cause to adjust the health of the body, just like exercise or these other things we do that we know have an acute effect, but that acute effect can be drastically compounded over time by going to the gym, doing exercise, lifting, things of that nature.
And nobody says, gee, if going to the gym for an hour is good for you, I think I'll go for 8 hours tomorrow because that'll be better. Okay, that's an overdose. So we know the body lets you know when you've done enough to improve it. And it also suggests that if you keep going, you then stop that level of improvement.
What do you have as a formal definition? Because I've heard you say that the definition of it being sub-perceptual isn't 100% accurate.
I admit it was a word I used, and I will go down in infamy for it. Because people do notice. People notice that they feel better. People notice their symptoms are less. They notice they have less pain. They notice their migraines are abating. It's very noticeable. What it isn't is anything classic psychedelic. The definition of microdosing is everything you know about high doses, that's not it. And literally, there's very limited physiologically measurable change with a microdose, except that the mood goes up.
And there's some other external factors that you can check with. Do you have any qualms about having your regular day or anything that's going to come up in it? If you do, it's too much. Is anybody else going to know that you're on something? If you do, it's too much. And of course, if you're feeling at all high or inebriated, or you're having any visual distortions or major kinds of thinking you don't normally do, all that means it's not a microdose anymore.
So it's self-limiting, which is if you feel a little bit what is called high, that's too much. And that kind of lets you know, just as if you drink, you usually know when you've had enough, and sometimes you know enough also to stop.
The refrigerator's talking to me, I did too much.
Exactly.
What are common doses and also I guess, substances would overlap in that. I'm thinking of, like, commonly I've heard psilocybin and LSD are common, but for frame of reference, like, can you educate us on a macro dose and then what is considered more of a micro dose?
Let's talk about LSD, and we're talking about micrograms, which are millionths of a gram.
Yeah.
Okay? A microdose is about 5 to 12 micrograms.
Tiny, tiny.
And another way of just the bigger frame is that we've said for a long time, and everybody seems to agree that a microdose is generally 1/10 to 1/20th of what a full recreational dose of something would be. So if LSD, a full recreational dose, is 100 micrograms, then a microdose is, as we said, 5 to 12 or somewhere around there. If psilocybin, if a full dose is about 3 grams, then about 0.3 grams at the high end, and then going down below that is the microdose. But we keep finding that people are taking less or at the bottom end of the ranges and having very effective results. So again, less is enough.
So would the recommendation be to start very low and see what you feel, and then only if necessary, slightly go up from there?
That's exactly
It was almost
right.
like the inverse, because I know everyone in the US culture at least wants to be like, I want to start high and then I'll just back off a little bit from that.
What we know is if you want to climb a high mountain, you start by climbing a low mountain. This is normal behavior, is you don't start with excess. And what we have found is if people say, I think I'll start low, we say start lower than that. Start low enough so you think you'll have no effect. That will give you a base. And then you can raise it slightly until you have the desired effect, which again is not anything external. It's a feeling of the symptoms you're interested in are less. The mood that you're looking for is more. As one young man said, I only take it when I have a coding problem. So some people just use it for intellectual use. Again, starting low gives you maximum control and minimum possibility of any problem. Therefore, it's a kind of common sense way of doing it.
Nice. One of the big things I've noticed with it, primarily using a microdose of psilocybin, probably off and on for going on maybe 3 years now, is initially I did it more often, and then now I just do it on a
Right.
as needed basis. And the biggest difference I found was maybe a little bit of mood, but I found especially for writing or creative stuff, it just felt like I could come up with better word selection that were more not something I would pick, but yet felt like it was the right word, especially when I was doing a rough draft, or especially when I was editing, like trying to find different ways of saying the same thing. I found that it was like super useful for that.
Had we had this discussion before we finished the book, you would have gotten a small little quote for that, because it's a really good way of seeing that your cognitive capacities were improved, not off the charts, but improved. And I've helped a lot of journalists who've interviewed me, and I've said, hint, it's really good for first drafts. And I've gotten a lot of letters back that said, hey, man, that's true. So that's one of the ways that we see it being used in academia. It's used by students, it's used by people trying to pass tests. It improves your normal capacity to do what you do just enough better that you notice it. And your own description was really wonderful.
Yeah, I want to take us back just a second. You were
Yes,
talking
please.
about going slow. If you have enough time, start really slow, and a few days later, see, and then that's exactly the right way to start. But the other way of being conservative that makes sense is using a conservative protocol or schedule. So there's different protocols. One of them is named after Jim, the Fadiman protocol, and that's you're on day 1, you're off day 2, you're off day 3, and then you're back on day 4. So that's the most conservative protocol, and for many people that works really well because it gives you plenty of time to experience that second day effect, including we have research that sleep on the second day is really much better. An actual study was done on that. And then the third day, you're just doing a full reset. So I like to recommend the conservative Fadiman protocol for people if they're to get going with it.
Yeah, that's great because and I've looked at some of the research on the different protocols, and it's right now across the board. And I agree that with anything that has the potential for having big changes, like just being more conservative, starting low, seeing how it goes for you, I think is a much more sane approach, at least to me.
And one of the things that we found is some people say, I started at the lowest dose you recommend, and it was way too much. What do you recommend? So what do we say? How about taking a tenth of that? And what we have is a lot of people, not a huge number of people, but enough people say, I actually function better at 1/10 of the lowest dose you published. And they call themselves the micro people. And that's just because human variation is very large. There's another group that doesn't have much of an effect until it has a much larger dose than we recommend. And these are usually people with high functioning autism. And they say, hey, man, I took what you recommended, nothing, but then I took 3 times as much and I have the exact range of effect that you write about. So we're still learning.
Interesting.
One of the interesting things is when you think about somebody just taking just 1 microgram, are there people, and the answer is 1 microgram has 1.54 quadrillion molecules of LSD in it, and the body has 30 or 40 trillion cells. So even 1 microgram, there's plenty of substance to have an effect on people who are open to that.
Yeah. Do we have any idea how much of that is more on the physiology side? Like we talked initially off air about caffeine. People have different slow versus fast metabolizers of caffeine.
Right.
Do we think it's more on the physiologic side, or is it also some people are just maybe more, I don't know if perceptive is a word, or maybe sensitive to notice change compared to others?
Perceptive and sensitive are measures of physiological capacity.
Yeah.
One of my daughters is very sensitive to noise. So when things are at an average volume, they're very loud for her. There's nothing right or wrong about that. There's also people who run ultra marathons, and then there's people like me. That's a wide range. Okay. And by the way, ultra marathoners have all discovered microdosing. It
Yeah, that
helps
was one of my
endurance and
questions.
it lowers pain.
Ben Greenfield told us that the word was out in that community. The other day I was in a podcast by a native shaman, and she told me that among her people, little bits of peyote for long running has been long known about.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Do you think that is some analgesic effect? Do you think it's just putting people in a different headspace, combination of all the above?
It's very hard to separate headspace from body space.
Oh,
As
definitely.
there is this thing isn't as separate.
Right.
It's only separate in academic departments where they each have their own chair. So what we get from athletes, and ultramarathoners just happens to be what we're most delighted. It's a very interesting group. But what athletes point out is they have greater endurance. And in things like martial arts, they say, I can see the other person's move 1/10 of a second sooner. And as one of our favorite guys said, I used to get silvers. Now I microdose, I get golds.
Mm.
And he says, isn't it I'm much better? I'm very much better in ways that count, and they're very small. So, of course, it's the mind. If you think you're going to have a good time, the chances of having a good time just went up. And you can say at the end of the evening, I thought I'd have a good time, and it was horrible because you were paying attention. Not magic. Intention is important. It's not magic.
We also have in different native traditions the notion of hunting acuity and stamina. So
Yeah.
have been used for who knows how long for hunting as well.
And I think there is some data on LSD in terms of visual acuity and some other metrics. Is that correct?
Yeah, we know that LSD increases literally your visual acuity. And it also increases, more importantly, your capacity to focus. So when you were using it for the writing, what was happening is that you were able to stay in what we call the zone longer and better, but it was still using only your capacity, just using them better. If you look at ads for running shoes, they all say it'll make you run better. They don't really say shoes run better.
And so what's exciting about this is we divvy up the benefits of microdosing between physical and mental benefits and for conditions, and then for enhanced performance. And then the enhanced performance is things like art, creativity, writing, music, but it's also volleyball and wrestling and running. And it seems likely to me that eventually there will be aficionados at the edge of performance in every physical endeavor who are going to check out and see whether microdosing helps whatever it is that they're into in particular. And I'm guessing it will.
But also partly mental, partly physical. Let's take one more sport that's even more
Yeah.
popular than everything Jordan has mentioned. Years ago, I got a note that said, if people figure out what this is good for your libido, you got a real product, man. And so what we looked at, and people do report better sex, okay, but they report it in two different ways. One possibility is simply more arousal, more energy, etc., more libido. The other is more awareness of the other, more sensitive to the other, more wanting the other to have pleasure. And either of those will improve people's sexual life. Microdosing appears to do some of both.
No, that's fascinating. And I have used some microdosing before kiteboarding sessions. So you've got like this big parachute thing, you're attached to some lines, and if you do it correctly, it'll lift you up in the air and you can kind of fly through the air and hopefully land nice and soft. Or if you screw it up, you get dropped out of the sky like a sack of potatoes and it doesn't really end so well. But the thing I've noticed is that you've got a very short period of time sometimes to make a decision. Am I going to really bring the kite down fast so I can land soft? Am I going to bail out on this? Or learning new things, like just being able to, as weird as it sounds, but see what's actually going on. It just feels like to me I have those couple more super brief half a second of being able to see and feel where everything is more accurately. Again, it's not I'd say a massive difference, but it feels like I'm able to make better decisions based off of better information coming in at that time.
We're supposed to be giving you answers, but you're doing better than we are. But what you're saying is it's the decision. You're better at what you're doing.
Correct.
Okay. And it isn't one of these things where, gee, I've never done that. I'll microdose and I'll really be good at it. No, not at all. It's not magical. It simply says your system is designed to work well. It's capable of working better. Microdosing apparently improves the system at the level that you're reporting, and it also improves the system, say, for people with migraines. What we find with people with migraines, chronic migraines, is they still will get migraines, but maybe 1/20th as much. And that's a magnificent difference. So
yeah, that's a huge difference.
The body somehow able to prevent the migraines, and it wasn't able to do it before.
And cluster headaches too.
Yeah, there's been some interesting research on that too, related to psilocybin and cluster headaches for sure.
Just going back to a second to the kiteboard, it sounds to me like you're having minor experiences of flow and you're in a different part of who you are. So this is the previous book that Jim and I wrote together.
Yeah.
And another way of looking at microdosing is that it tones down the default mode network. So you're not in the normal part of who you are. Another way of thinking about it is there's more entropy going on in the brain. And you're able to just see and move into a different part of who you are, maybe one that is in more flow, or maybe one that's going to be nicer to your partner. And you can work with being in the right mind at the right time more directly. And you're just more aware of yourselves, and the selves are parts or subpersonalities of the people you're with.
And how much of this do you think has longer term benefits? So I'm thinking of the increase in neuroplasticity. So one of my little theories, not just my theory, but that if you take substances that can increase neuroplasticity, that neuroplasticity isn't always a good or a bad thing. It depends on what do you direct it to do. It could be a negative. If you're doing things that are negative, you could learn bad habits. I equate it to if I took up golf, which I've quit playing golf just because I was making myself worse at it. So I said, okay, if I ever decide to play golf, I'm going to hire a coach. I'm going to learn how to do it. But if I took something to increase neuroplasticity, didn't work with a coach, I would just be getting bad habits faster. But if I worked with a coach and I learned the right technique, in theory, I could be getting better faster. Do you think some of this is related to microdosing and neuroplasticity?
That's a wonderful question. And it's, will this make me a more successful pickpocket?
Yeah.
The answer is probably yes.
Yeah.
Will it make you think that being a pickpocket is not a good thing to do for your soul? Maybe.
Yeah.
High doses will probably suggest that you
Yeah.
get an occupation because that isn't using your higher self very well. But when we're talking about something that improves functioning, we're not making a moral judgment.
But I think you are right. And we use an analogy from Andrew Huberman and then expand the analogy. Andrew said that when you take a large dose of a psychedelic, it's like you're using a big lever and you're prying open a boulder. And the boulder, which is rolling through the village of your mind, is neuroplasticity. So you can direct that to plow a field or to go over a tent where the children are in school. So you have to be really careful where you put that. With microdosing, it's much smaller levers and it's just a little rock of neuroplasticity rolling through the village of your mind every 3 days. So I think the answer is you can see it and learn to work with it and learn to move into the part of you that is aware that you're in the state on day one and you're still feeling it on day two. And I think that it can be something that you can learn to direct and that you should.
Now, I'm going to pull back a little from my no moral position because Paul Stamets has a very simple sentence. People who use mushrooms are nicer. Now, I've been in the psychedelic world for decades, and I've also been an industrial consultant and a management consultant, a lot of other things. I've dealt with a lot of other groups. People who have had psychedelic experience are likely to be easier and more flexible about things that need changing. They're less attached to their belief system because they've seen that their belief system is not made of iron, it's made of thoughts, and thoughts can be changed and improved. It has that kind of, if we believe that being kinder to people is beneficial for the species, let alone the planet, microdosing is more in that direction.
Yeah, I find that interesting because I think exactly what you said. You have, at least on a macrodose level, you have the awareness of what may actually be going on, and you also have the increased flexibility, maybe cognitive flexibility to do something about it too. So maybe those people also have more awareness, and they also have, from a neuroplasticity level, the ability to maybe go more in that direction of the awareness. So the end result is that their phenotype does become more cognitively flexible.
Yeah, cognitively flexible is really a remarkable statement. Okay, we have an educational system that more and more kind of presses you into a little tight space and says this is the way to truth, called science, and there really isn't another way. And cognitive flexibility says my curiosity doesn't stop at the edge of the page, and that microdosing allows me greater use of my own cognitive flexibility.
Awesome. And I liked your point, Jordan, about the difference between the kind of the high dose and the lower dose. So I think of the high dose, there's some data showing it may even open up critical periods in the brain again, or we have these increased longer periods of neuroplasticity. But I think you also have a much greater responsibility at that point too, of making sure you get most of the things correct. Or if you scale back to a microdose, you maybe would have it before a training session or you're doing a skills session. Okay, and now it's going to work maybe through that. Maybe you don't take it the next day and so on. So you've got these small changes over time. You don't have these huge levers that you're opening up and hoping that the other things I get during that increased time are more correct. It's more fine tuning over time than these kind of more massive changes.
Yeah, the massive changes are fine for certain kinds of things.
Oh,
But for
sure.
instance, if someone is taking microdosing, which they do for chronic pain, the pain, even if you take a high dose, you will probably not have the feeling of pain for the day, but you'll have it back the next day. What you're microdosing is you are reducing the parts of you that produce the pain. And it's much more like how you get muscle strength. And the system, your body says, I don't really like pain, but it's really useful for emergencies. Well,
Yeah,
I have
usually gets you to do
pain
something
and
different.
there's no emergency, and my system isn't quite capable of handling it. But for some reason, microdose ups the capacity of the whole system, and we see pain literally diminishing over time. And once it's diminished, then one doesn't keep microdosing.
So it's really important to keep in mind the difference between pharmaceuticals and microdosing. Pharmaceuticals are designed to handle one specific symptom, and they'll do it however they have to do it, and whatever the quote unquote side effects are that happen, that's how it goes down. With microdosing, you're enhancing the whole system, the whole body. We've mentioned some of the ways we think that's happening. There may be others, like maybe mitochondrial function, but it's naturally working. So an example is with serotonin, microdoses bond with the serotonin receptors as an agonist and make them healthier. With SSRIs, you're really putting like a wrench in the system that prevents the serotonin that's already been used from going up. And of course, there's going to be a lot of symptoms from negative side effects from that. So it's a very different approach. And this is why earlier we heard from a few people, including David Nutt, he was the drug czar of England, that he was suspicious when he saw that there were claims for microdosing helping 15 different things. Now we're up to 45 or 50 different things. But again, that's because it's not being addressed at one specific symptom. It's a whole body enhancer, and it seems to work in lots of different ways.
Yeah, nobody accuses a vitamin of only curing one symptom.
Yeah, or exercise or sleep or...
Exactly. So we're finding that microdosing is better described in that group. And that pharmaceuticals, which are symptom specific or organ specific or diagnosis specific, are different any more than no one says, should I have this operation to take this tumor out of my elbow or should I microdose? Okay, that's a silly question because these are very different ways of approaching the problem. If I have this tumor taken out, how can I accelerate my healing? Microdosing seems to be a good addition to whatever else you're doing.
From a research standpoint, I know there's a lot more ongoing research now on microdosing. There's a bunch more stuff coming out this year and next year. It's not published yet. But it also seems to me that it solves one of the bigger issues, at least in macrodose psychedelic research, is the argument about blinding procedures and what do you use do you use a sham group? Do you use a placebo group? What do you do? One researcher was quoted that even psychedelic naive people are not going to mistake a high dose psilocybin experience for niacin, for example. So there definitely is a blinding issue, but it seems like with microdosing, you might be able to get around that a little bit more. And then do they ever ask people at the end, do they think they were in the active versus placebo group?
They always ask.
Yeah.
Okay, and guess what?
They can tell.
Mostly.
Yeah, that's what I've seen too.
Mostly because it's the wrong tool. There's nothing wrong with a double-blind study used for what it's used for.
Yep.
But imagine, here's a double-blind study, okay? I want to check if people will react negatively to being hit over the head with a 2x4. Okay, we don't know. Could be they like it. We don't know. Okay, how am I going to blind? I'm going to do a double blind. Okay, I'm going to take a foam bat and I'll make it look like a 2x4. I'll paint it correctly. And I'm going to hit people over the head with either the foam or the 2x4. And I'm going to be astounded that they broke the blind. Okay, because it's obviously that's a stupid study because we all know in advance exactly that people can tell the difference. Double blinds were designed to check if the substance was as good as the other substance.
Right.
And a lot of pharmaceutical companies figured that's a terrible test because our version of whatever it is very much like theirs. But if we make theirs, we'll eliminate them. How about a placebo? How about nothing? So all now we're checking is our substance better than nothing? It's an easier one. What we have a different notion, which is real life evidence is what you end up with if you care about anything. You don't care about what the science says. You said, what does it happen in the real life people? So our book is based on about 10,000 reports from real life people in real life situations. With a medication, you don't care what the company tells you. It only is true if your physician says, you know, I think maybe one of these would help. It's new. Let me know how it feels. That's the science that matters. The fact that we all, the double blinds, are worshipped It's a historical problem and not one that it's simply the wrong tool. There's nothing wrong with it. But as someone said, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem is a nail. And we have other tools.
Yeah, I think to me, I look at it as I think a lot of times there's a rush in academia to study mechanisms and publish novel mechanisms because they're sexy and they can get published. And 100% there's a time and a place. We should understand how stuff works. However, I would argue what you guys are saying too is the first question is, does the thing you're looking at work? Does it move the needle, regardless, placebo, not placebo, whatever? Did the thing that you're looking at, did it get a result that would be considered a positive result? And then once we agree that this substance or this thing is seeing the results we want, okay, now we can do more of the smaller mechanistic work to see what's going on.
Then it's worth it. There's some interest.
Correct. Yeah.
And
Yeah, because
also
you know you're going in the right direction.
Right.
when you read the stories of people, one section of our book is about women's health issues, and it's called The Mothers of the Mushroom Survey. And generally speaking, you're not allowed to study anything having to do with pregnancy or breastfeeding, but they did the survey. And when you read these stories and get the depth of the profound changes that happened in these women and how grateful they were, reading stories like that produces a knowledge of what happened that really transcends whatever type of study you're going to do.
Yeah, and so tell us about the data capture. You guys have been doing this for quite a while, and you've got accumulated a lot of data.
Yeah. If you read scientific studies, and I don't recommend anyone should have to do that, 10, 12, 20 people, that's quite ordinary. 50 people is considered a big study. 200 is considered largest study ever done. And we're looking at thousands of reports from about 80 countries. This is a worldwide interest. And we also now and then say to people in indigenous cultures, how long do you feel, how much is this part of your culture? They say, the first 1,000 years we can probably count. So when someone says, has this had a double blind yet? I said, how about 1,000 years of use? Would that be maybe an equivalent? And then they usually don't like me and walk away.
We do look at most of the science that's been done on microdosing has been done since we started writing the book. We do our best to incorporate all of the science we can. And when science comes out that we know is incorrect, we're willing to take a stand on that. And so we're very much aware, and Jim is very much in a web of everyone who's doing everything. And so the book does, and we wait until the last second to keep putting new things in.
Oh, sure.
Murray, that's a very important study. And we just kept putting stuff in. So we're looking at everything. We start the science section with this quote from Jeff Bezos that says, if your anecdotes and your data disagree, your anecdotes, which we call real world evidence, are usually correct. And it's not so much that you mismeasured your data, it's that you're asking the wrong question. So we think that the science is really clear that it's A, not just a placebo, and B, it's really working in a wide variety of things for people. And that's also why it's spreading word of mouth.
Now, let me ask you who are listening to us, microdosingbook.com, one word, microdosingbook.com, is our website where we take in stories. And we take in stories of interest. We put the best ones back out on the website. We correspond with people because this is live science. And since the book's been out, we've had a couple of just remarkable breakthrough cases in areas that we didn't cover in the book. Because again, if you have something that improves the body's functioning, there's a large number of things to look at. So we're still in our science mode, still working to make sure that when someone shares their story, and we let them know the reason you are sharing this story is only so other people will benefit. So that's a scientific model, but it's based on a kind of communal caring, which is a much older model.
And you'll notice how far it's gotten. Jim didn't start being interested in this until 2009 and 10. He told me about it right about the same time, and I started working with it. He started asking these questions, talking at talks, reporters noticed, and there was a positive feedback loop or virtuous cycle of more reports, more information, more new in different areas, and then all the way up to Ayala Waldman writing her book and then Michael Pollan featuring Jim. And so we don't know if microdosing has gone like this. We don't know if it's going to go like this or at the top. But I think we're still pretty much at the beginning of getting clear what the general boundaries are, what it looks like, why it's important to take time off between doses and time off after several weeks of microdosing in most cases. So it's still coming together.
We're learning. Also, it's more popular than we thought. There's if you go to Google search and you say, how many times did people look at microdosing? The last year, it whooped up to about 3 million. And I thought, that's a very big number. I'm going to mention that on a podcast. But then I looked at a study from the RAND Corporation, like 90% of its studies are mainly government and defense. They're not exactly a psychedelic site. And they estimate, US only, 8 million people took psilocybin last year. Now, here's the one that made us interested, which is they estimate half of that, 4 million, were microdoses. So we think it's really valuable for people like you to talk to people like us so that people can understand that there's a lot of information that may help them, both with their physical and mental conditions and just being more powerful and effective. And it's useful to find out.
And you think of certain groups who could benefit. We've been talking to younger women, some of whom have hormonal issues that microdosing seems to work with pretty well, some of whom have depression issues. And when you think of the high reward to risk ratio, the great safety of microdosing, how inexpensive it is, in some pictures, it could handle a lot of the depression and the ADHD and the other things that are out there in the world in a way that has very little risk and is much less expensive than how we go about it now.
Rule of thumb in medicine is supposed to be do the least harm possible, which means if there's 10 medications for something, you don't start with the strongest one. Microdosing it makes sense in many cases to start with that because it has less side effects, it's less cost, it's less dangerous, it leads less observational problems, etc. And the book basically covers a wide enough range of results so that people are beginning to see that it's not about the symptom or the disease or the physical or mental condition. It's about, it is, as you pointed out, it's more like sleep, it's more like exercise. And we all know you can mess up sleep, you can certainly mess up exercise. Nothing is without possible negative effects, but the risk-reward ratio is one worth looking at.
Yeah. What are some of the potential risks in general? Most of the ones I've seen are associated with higher doses that can be sometimes resolved with people watching what you're doing, set and setting, etc. I know there was some concerns about psilocybin and some cardiac risks, but there's some debate about that paper. But any thoughts about what are some of the risks associated with it?
There's a paper, recent research, I think out of Poland, and they just did one of these computer generated, let's look at everything possible that could be looked at. And they said there are several symptoms. There's some headaches, there's some nausea, tinnitus. We will talk about tinnitus, which is its own little world. But they said all of the ones that we can see from all the literature that's currently been published is they're transient and have no after effects. Now, there's very few substances you can say that about.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay? But again, we're talking about small amounts of a small substance. The only thing that we've noticed is people who have tinnitus ringing in their ears. A number of them say, when I microdose, it's worse. And that's people who have tinnitus. And some people who say, I have never had tinnitus before, but I'm now microdosing. There is some tinnitus. Again, what we found in pretty much every case, it goes away when the microdosing goes away. People with tinnitus, on the whole, say, I still have my tinnitus. Some people say, actually, it alleviated my tinnitus. I've never heard before the world without my ringing. And other people basically say that it didn't matter. They had it for a while and it went away. So there are a couple of things, but nothing serious enough that you put it in bold on the side of the pill bottle.
One is a red-green color blindness, and people sometimes have tracers. And then there's this other thing about things that if you already have them, maybe you shouldn't microdose. One of them is anxiety, and that sort of depends on the kind of anxiety you have. We can talk about bipolar. It seems to be fine if people take it in the low part of their cycle. And in terms of people who have any history of schizophrenia or that sort of thing, we've never actually heard a case somebody microdosing and all of a sudden they have a full-blown schizophrenic fit or anything like that.
And we have a few cases with schizophrenics that basically say high doses are terrible.
Yeah.
Microdoses clear my head. So that's just, again, all we have is real life evidence. Because again, when I was worrying, and I said to my friends, I see on your research you say, but don't take people who've had a psychotic episode. Don't take people with schizophrenia. Don't take people keep them out of your study. I thought, you must know something. So I wrote them, these are friends. And I said, is there any evidence that these people would have a bad experience? And I got back usually their papers, sometimes underlined in yellow. And it basically said, we don't have them in our study. So I wrote a second round and says, does anyone have any actual evidence that it hurts someone? No. Is there a good reason not to have them in your study? You bet. Imagine I have someone who's bipolar in my study. Yeah. 9 months later, they have an episode. I'm blamed. Okay, so science is not quite as pristine and neutral as it likes to be.
Same thing with the heart valve issue.
There's no evidence.
It's never right. They have a model that's based on rats and it's a different substance. And we were at a talk and a guy who's a pharmacologist got up and got really agitated that we weren't taking it seriously enough. And we're like, if you find evidence, we'll be the first people who want to know, and we'll figure out who maybe should not microdose based on that. But right now they're just making it up.
Yeah. Awesome. So I assume the book is most places now, or where's the best place that people can find the book?
Stores and online are the two places that we know of. We're not in spas yet.
Yeah, it sounds like you're working on it.
If you go to microdosingbook.com and you click on the order, it will take you to a page that, based on where you live, will list bookstores other than Amazon.
Oh, nice.
You can find a local bookstore, or that's how we recommend. And also, the audio version is narrated by a great narrator, Kaleo Griffith, and because we wrote the book in a question and answer format, audio is perfect for it. You get one chunk at a time, and if that's what you have listened to, and you listen to one question, each question stands on its own. So people seem to really be enjoying the audiobook.
Yeah, people are actually buying the audio at a much higher level than we would have anticipated compared with most books. So it's really good.
Very cool. And give us the web address again if people want to report their microdosing experience.
Sure. It's Microdosing Book. One word, microdosingbook.com. It's very easy to find, and it's easy to find where to, and anything anybody posts, it will always be anonymous coming back out from us. You can leave your name if you want, but we will never attach anybody's name to anything we put out there because that protects everybody.
Great. And do you guys have any social media or anything else people can find more about all the great stuff you guys are doing?
We're just building a YouTube channel that's in process. It's going to be Fadiman and Gruber, followed by a colon, and probably microdosing, many selves, and more.
But if you YouTube either microdosing or either of our names, there's more information than you want.
Yeah. And if you go to the webpage where it says events, we have a list of all of the podcasts and talks we've been in, which is now about 20, and links to most of them. So you'd say, why would somebody listen twice to the same thing? But each host is different and has a different focus. And some of them are interesting, and some of them have famous celebrities interviewing us. So it's a lot of fun, actually.
Yeah, we also have a couple of bookstore videos up there if you're curious what happens when you go and listen to an author. Because we're very strong on the people in the audience, their questions matter, rather than we pontificate for 45 minutes and then sign books.
Which is a lot of
great.
fun, by the way.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for all your time, and thank you both for all your great work over the past many decades, and the research and all the stuff you're doing. It's awesome to see, and it's nice to see that there's actual some data behind this and collection of more data, which will hopefully spur on more people to then justify the research they're doing, and everything will just kind of keep doing more and better, which is great to see.
Well, it's also nice to talk to someone who's knowledgeable and comfortable and a nice role model of you've used these substances in both ways, totally different ways, high doses and low doses, and here you are, functional.
Yeah, I'm still functional so far.
Still kiteboarding.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Well, thank you
Thank you so much. Appreciate
really
it.
a pleasure. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
A great little actress.
Yep, and getting smaller all the time.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. The podcast is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You should not use the information on the podcast for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease or prescribing any medication or other treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider before taking any medication or nutritional supplement, and with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this or any other podcast. Reliance on the podcast is solely at your own risk. Information provided on the podcast does not create a doctor-patient relationship between you and any of the health professionals affiliated with our podcast. Information and statements regarding dietary supplements are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to therein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.